Good morning in the US and afternoon in Europe. My name's Kate Riordan, Chief Programs Officer at Epic, and this is Jennifer Shu, our US Head of Development at Epic. We'll be hosting you today for our first virtual conference, Epic Live 2020. As you likely know, Epic's mission is a world in which every child has access to safety, empowerment, and equal opportunity. We find, select, back, and monitor organizations in order to catalyze their impact. Our two panels today will convene some members of Epic portfolio organizations. We're going to explore the innovative approaches they're using, applying these new solutions to long-standing social challenges that are driving greater impact for the children and youth they serve. Our first panel is focusing on integrating youth in the work and the organizations that are serving them. And our second, led by Jennifer, is on narrowing the digital divide and enhancing access to education. Jennifer.
Thanks, Kate. So welcome, everyone. It's really cool to see folks logging in from all over the world. So this live event will last 1 hour, featuring exclusive interviews from our Epic portfolio CEOs, who will share more on the social impact trends that they are testing and setting. So we're excited to kick off our two panels today. But first, if you're new to Hopin, let me go over how this whole thing works. So we'll be hosting the two panels, one after the other, right here on the main stage. Each panel is a mix of recorded interviews and live conversation. So starting now, you can actually use the chat bar on the right-hand side of your screen to submit questions, and they will be answered by our speakers at the end of each panel. So now let's get started. We have a very special guest tuning in live from Colorado, and he will be talking to us about the importance of connection in our world today. So our guest is a chef, a restaurateur, a philanthropist, and an Epic ambassador. His personal mission is to pursue an America where everyone has access to real food. He sits on the board of some companies you might have heard of: Chipotle, Tesla, and SpaceX. Please help me welcome Kimbal Musk.
Hey guys, I am so excited to be here today. Social entrepreneurship has been something that has become very much a big part of my life, and I love that the Epic Foundation, the Epic ambassadors, and all of you guys watching are all so passionate about it. For me, my story, I came from South Africa. I'm an immigrant, came here in the 90s, and went down to California to work on a technology company. It was very exciting time, early days of the internet, but my passion was food. My passion was connecting people to others through food. And when I sold that company, I went to New York. I learned how to cook. I trained under some of the top chefs in the country. But what was really most powerful was I was in New York during 9/11. And 9/11, when the towers were hit, I lived just a few blocks away from the World Trade Centers. When the towers hit and we ran with the rest of New York uptown, we watched the towers fall. I watched the first one fall at Canal Street and the second one at Union Square. It just totally changed my world. Up until that point, I was a believer in business as usual. I was a successful entrepreneur that really should just continue up until that point, continue doing more of the same things that I knew what to do, which is building businesses, generating a bottom line, which you do have to still do as a social entrepreneur. But what 9/11 taught me, I got this incredible opportunity to cook for the firefighters, and for 6 weeks I lived at ground zero, cooked every day, 16 hours a day, and drove ATVs down to giant piles of melting metal. The metal still melting for weeks after 9/11, and feeding the firefighters. And these firefighters would come in, and they would come in completely covered in dust and completely exhausted, and we would feed them with some of the best food they've ever had, and life would come back into their eyes. They would start talking with their colleagues and their friends and the people that they go out and risk their lives with, and they would put their fire suits back on and go right back out again. It was the most powerful experience that I had ever had in my life. And it just taught me the power of purpose and the power of helping and the power of giving back. And from that point, I decided to stop working on technology companies and work on food. And I built a restaurant group called The Kitchen. We eventually did a lower cost version called Next Door Eatery. We're growing those. Those restaurants are going through a super tough time right now. But again, because it's my passion, it's okay. We're here for our communities. We're here to do it right, and we will figure out the business over time. And then we formed Big Green, which teaches kids how to grow food, teaches them science through the growing of food across the country. We're in 700 schools. And again, a business that is really not set up for this kind of pandemic because all the schools are closed. But when you have a passion for what you do, when you have a purpose, you figure it out. And so Big Green at Home has been a program we've built over the past 8 months, where parents are now taught how to teach their kids in their home gardens. And Big Green at Home, we're gonna do a very exciting plan for 2021. And we're gonna continue to pursue our mission, and we're gonna continue to make it work. And it all comes from really believing in what you do, believing that what you do really makes a difference. And that's why I'm an EPIC ambassador. I am an EPIC ambassador because I want to improve the health and education of kids in our country, in our continent, across the world, and I'm proud to be part of it. Thank you guys, and enjoy your show.
Kimbal, thanks so much. I think you queued us up beautifully for so many of the things we're going to talk about. And one of those is the ways in which, dedicated organizations and individuals are being forced to adapt, to evolve, to continue to meet the needs of their communities. Jennifer, in particular, in the second panel, is going to build on examples of that. So thank you for your wonderful remarks. And with that, we'll send you off with our thanks, and we'll move into the first panel. Thank you. Great. So you'll see here we have convened a panel of EPIC portfolio organizations who are examining critical ways in which youth can and should shape the programs and the issues that are affecting their lives. We're increasingly seeing youth emerge as change makers, advocates, and leaders in the movements and the issues of their lives. And we're seeing systems, organizations, communities shifting and expanding to receive these voices. Whether on issues of gun violence, gender equity, racial bias, education reform, climate change, the voices and perspectives of youth are increasingly valued as essential to making meaningful progress. We're going to explore these issues of representation and inclusion and the increasing momentum of youth as global change makers. To do that, I'm joined by three hugely impressive nonprofit leaders who are leaders of organizations that are within EPIC's portfolio. First, we have Hilary Omala, who's the president of Carolina For Kibera, a community-based organization in Kibera, Nairobi, which is one of Africa's largest informal settlements, where his organization is advancing the education, health, and social welfare of children and young people and families. We have Melissa Johns, the executive vice president of Pivotal, which is a California-based nonprofit serving foster youth with training, mentorship, job acquisition support, and a whole plethora of services to ensure that they can both thrive and survive and succeed as adults. And here with us in New York City is John MacPhee, the executive director, hi John, and CEO of the JED Foundation, an American nonprofit dedicated to protecting the emotional health of teens and young people and preventing suicide. John, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to start. I asked all of our guests why and how they came about involving their youth clients much more in the work and the design of their organizations. We're going to start in Kenya with Hillary, and then we'll come back to John and Melissa as well and get to hear what they had to say about this. But first, we'll go to Hillary in Kenya.
The CFK works in partnership with communities to fight extreme poverty through innovative community-based platforms that are focused on long-term youth development and life-saving public health. And so this is all on the basis of the fact that 16 million of Kenyan population right now are young people in the age category of 10 to 24 years, which is our target population. And this forms 35% of the total Kenya population. So it just makes sense for us to begin to grow a generation of people who will look at everything, not just in Kenya, but across the world, a bit differently and positively. And so our work and how it's designed is centered around this category of people. And so we mainly work with schools in informal and very urban settlements, where we have set up examples of engagement such as the girls empowerment. At the community level, we have the community advisory board that has the youth representation, and they talk about all development activities within their communities. We also have the youth peer leadership engagement, and a good example is our youth peer provider initiative that targets peers in terms of education and engagement in the development of their communities. And then lastly, we have the Sports for Development program that uses sports as a tool of mobilizing young people who come together, engage in sporting activities, but get to learn a lot about development and issues affecting them. We have seen a lot of leadership potential and growth among many young people who have been engaged in this program. And today, 9 out of 25 of our colleagues who work in programs have grown through CFK initiatives. They are giving back to their communities right now by providing services. They are playing the role of being role models within their communities and encouraging young people going through similar experiences. They have had the deepest understanding of challenges that young people face, and they're probably better placed to find solutions to those. And so this has been our model for the last 19 years, and we hope to continue with this even as we seek to expand to other counties.
Great to hear the diversity of places that Carolina for Kibera is placing youth. We're back here with John. John, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Really a pleasure to have you. We'd love to hear your take on the question that Hillary was asked. Can you share how JED thinks about it, how youth are integrated into your work, both with schools as well as your Storytellers initiative?
Yes. So the JED Foundation, first, just for background, is a nonprofit that focuses on protecting emotional health and preventing suicide for teens and young adults. We know that, this is the age of expression for mental illness. It's often undiagnosed, and actually rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal behavior are rising for a variety of reasons among young people. In our work, we focus on schools, on high schools and colleges and universities, because those are the real life systems where so many young people are and emerging adults are. And we help those schools strengthen their mental health, substance use, and suicide prevention policies, programs, and systems. And we do that through a structured process that's led by a team. And one of the key elements of that team is that students must be a part of it. Students must be a part, young people must be a part of the leadership group that oversees mental health planning for the school. We also, as part of our work, survey students and get input from students in terms of, what's happening, what do they see as the issues and problems, and what do they see as the opportunities and the ways that their schools can strengthen what they're doing. So I would say in our work, we're very mindful to make sure that students are telling us what's going on. We're learning directly from them. They're generating the solutions and recommendations, and they're part of the leadership team that's actually creating the initiatives and the efforts. That's our school's systems change work. You also asked about our storytelling work. And in our storytelling work, we educate people about mental health, right? That it's something that we all have, we all share, we're all going to struggle. And having people with lived experience share their experiences. One of the best ways to reduce stigma and let us know we're not all alone. And so we have young adults in particular, as JED storytellers, sharing their experiences and their stories with other young adults, which is incredibly powerful. There's no better ambassador than a peer, as opposed to, an older adult telling you, what they remember, from their past.
Absolutely. And for those who were with us in last year's in-person gala, we had the benefit of one of JED's storytellers. So for those of us in the room, we got to feel and experience how transformative those voices really are. John, thank you. We're going to come back to you, but I'm going to switch us now over to Melissa from Pivotal. We asked a similar question of how have they integrated youth perspectives into their work? We're going to hear what Melissa had to say.
We have a core value at Pivotal that is to be youth-led. And often one of the ways that we describe that to people is that through the lens of our youth, we'd say nothing for us without us. And that shapes what we do because it's so important when working with foster youth to know that if you're youth-led, you're letting them be in the driver's seat. And that's something that since they've been put into the foster care system, they've had very little personal autonomy since. They've been taken from their homes. They're now in a system that makes all the decisions for them, where they will live, where they will go to school, sometimes even in group homes, when they will eat and what schedule they'll have when they do that. When you take so much of somebody's personal decision-making away, to build that back up and to empower them to make their own decisions means that we are that much further in helping them achieve their goals when we're talking about trying to go to college, trying to get their first job, having that internship that really is a lot of risk that they have to take. So if we put them in the driver's seat, that means that then they can lead us toward the goals that they want to achieve. Now, that said, how you do it as an organization is really where Pivotal shines. And we do that because we incorporate youth voice in every part of our work. Through our hiring practices, we do not hire direct service staff without a Pivotal youth being on the hiring panel. To even our programmatic decisions, we have a youth advisory board that helps us think through major decisions we're going to make, and we utilize their voice and their input and their feedback on things that we've done to further improve our programs every year. We don't have a programmatic year go by where we don't have an end of year survey, and we take all that feedback from the young people and as a group, as an organization, take that feedback and make adjustments to our programming as a result. So we start the training ground when they're really young, but ultimately it's one thing to ask for their feedback on decisions you're making. It's another thing to make sure that there are seats at the decision-making table and that true inclusion happens when those young people's voices are heard when decisions are getting made. And I can think of one example of this when I was in a board meeting at Pivotal, and we were discussing the importance of whether we should, in our career readiness programming, focus mostly on the internships, or do we spend a lot more of our programming talking about building professional network? And a lot of discussion happened, and then Lupe Diaz, our Pivotal alumna who sits on the board, said, listen, if we can do professional networking for these young people, that is worth gold to me, because I can tell you that other friends who grew up in other families had that professional network by nature of where they grew up and who their family members were. I didn't have that as a foster youth. And I know that if we do more professional networking for our young people and teach them how important it is, but also help them get their foot in the door with different career mentors, that they will then be able to translate that through their own hustle into their own success in their careers. And as soon as Lupe said that in the board meeting, it changed the tenor of that board meeting completely. They listened, they understood where she was coming from, and ultimately made decisions that I think now have resulted in better programming as a result.
Huge thanks to Melissa. I think, when we reflect on the answer from JED, when we reflect on the answer from Pivotal, it's really celebrating this idea of not just tokenistically including youth, but empowering them and creating space for them to actually operate as governing decision makers, as solution generators, as John used the expression. We know an immediate benefit of this can be seen in the advocacy initiatives of organizations, the external change making that they're doing in the ecosystems, the laws, the policies, the large scale public behaviors that impact the issues affecting children and youth that they're directly targeting. So I asked our guests to explore this part a bit more with us. So we're going to go back and hear what Melissa from Pivotal had to say on that.
People will often tell you that to change large systems that like the child welfare system or the education system, that can be slow moving work. And yet one of the ways that I have seen the fastest change happen is when youth voice is at the center of it. And we at Pivotal have known that our direct service work alone will not be enough to affect the large scale change we want to see. And so we do, as you say, work a lot in the system, what we like to call the ecosystem of all the different players that impact the foster youth experience. That could be the child welfare part, the education part, the mental health part, the foster families. So by bringing all those people together, you would think you could make some change and you could suggest some things that should be done differently. But what we realize is that the most powerful voice to represent Pivotal at that table is the voice of lived experience. So we hired a new position this last year called our Director of Strategic Partnerships. And we had a young woman, Ashley Jamont. We hired her for that position. She's a Pivotal alum who received her bachelor's degree with a Pivotal scholarship and then went on to earn her master's degree and is now back helping to shape the partnerships that we want to create in the community in order to see the kind of reform we'd like to achieve in the system. Ashley's also going to spearhead a lot of the work that enables some of our youth voice to come into different spaces where they can share their perspectives. And one of the most interesting ones right now is where young people in our programming are invited into a project where they are working on a human-centered design experience of rethinking the educational system and its intersection with foster youth. And so for young people in the system right now to think about how can it be made better, not just at the high school level, but also at the post-secondary level. How do we make sure that the college experience for foster youth works for them?
Great to hear more from Melissa. John, Melissa really built on this idea of lived experience that you started us off on. Can you share with us what does JED presume can be achieved specifically through these lived experiences, these voices of youth that couldn't otherwise be achieved organizationally?
Yeah. So I think if we think about first the audience, so a young person in our case who may be struggling with various pressures and stressors, may have an emerging mental illness. They don't know what's going on. They feel very alone. They're afraid to ask for help, etc. And then we think about who's going to be the best person to reach them, right? In a way that's going to resonate and they feel connected. And that's another person with lived experience who is, their age or perhaps a little bit older, but not too much older, who can share their experiences, their lived experiences, so that the person we're concerned about can see, oh my gosh, like I just connect with that. I see myself in that. And, nothing makes us feel more connected and reduces the shame, I think, than that. But also what's really important in these lived experiences stories is the recovery piece, the reaching out for help, the fact that help does help, but also the authenticity, that it's not like you get help and, boom, everything's great from that day forward. It's going to be bumpy, but it's going to be a journey that's going to be, beautiful and fulfilling. And there's just no better place or person to hear that from than from a peer with lived experience.
Thanks, John. I think it's something, regardless of whether you've experienced a need for mental health supports, that relatability of a peer is something we can all understand.
Yes, and I would even say, it's very powerful also for older adults and for families and for parents, they learn more from listening to other young people that are not their own children or their own loved one. So it's not just peer-to-peer, but young people with lived experiences, I think, can do an extraordinary job educating older adults, about what young people are experiencing.
You have unknowingly queued us up for something Hillary's remarks are going to touch on later, but about how youth impact not just peers, but he's going to give an example that'll amplify your point there quite nicely. I'm going to take us in a different direction for a minute. And it's about some of the responsibility and the ethics of engaging youth voices. So we know on one hand, it's critical to put youth experiences or rights holders in general in the campaigns, the messaging, and the advocacy. We know, though, that comes with a steep responsibility to protect the experiences of youth engaged in this work. Can you talk to us about how JED thinks about this, how you balance that priority of sharing and awareness raising with protection from any of these issues affecting youth that at times can be associated with harm, stigma, or any sort of social taboo or perception of a taboo?
Yes, it's an incredibly important question and issue. So the distinction here, young people can give input, they can be at the table, and they are. But when it comes to telling your story publicly and sharing it, we need to be really careful, as you're saying. So at the JED Foundation, we have our JED Storytellers program, which is a lived experience, live storytelling program that we discussed earlier. Before someone becomes a storyteller, we get to know them quite well, right? And they have to fill out an application. We actually check and make sure that they're in therapy and that their therapist thinks they're ready for this. And we lean towards having people who are over 18, actually, not always, but and who have some experience, perhaps sharing their story, just to make sure that they're really, really ready. And then when we do the trainings, they're 2-day workshops, and they're private. And no one participates. They're private, and we're there so that the individuals can gain experience and see what they think. And then we do a private storytelling event that's just for JED staff and like one person that's invited by every storyteller. So each individual can get their own experience. Then in a safe and private way. Then we debrief it and we talk and we decide person by person whether they're really ready to speak and in what formats. And so I guess the idea is we go very slowly and very carefully and very cautiously, before we have someone speak publicly about their lived experiences, which could include things like suicide attempts, right? Or self-harm. And so it's just really important to make sure that we've done all the work and they've done the work and that they know they want to share that story. And then we set up venues and opportunities to share their stories that are a good fit with what they're ready for and are safe.
John, thanks. I think it really helps us drill down from a value, but then how do you actually execute on that value and implement that inclusion, which comes with such steeper considerations. Hugely helpful. We're going to head back to Hillary from Carolina For Kibera. John has already very kindly queued up a bit of what Hillary is going to speak about, which is about this idea of we know that integrating youth in the work of organizations makes the work of those organizations more impactful. But he's going to explore with us a bit about how those youth become transformative individually within their communities, within their families, and what the cumulative trajectory of that can be. So we'll switch over to Hillary.
So Carolina For Kibera runs 2 programs that are focused on young people, the education and livelihoods engagement and the girls empowerment piece. I'll focus on the girls empowerment piece and particularly the girls parliament within schools in informal settlements in Nairobi. The Girls Parliament is modeled around issues such as citizenship and positive identity, leadership development, community service, life skills, reproductive health, financial inclusion, career guidance, entrepreneurship, and all issues affecting girls in their teenage years. And throughout this engagement, we have seen girls develop into leaders within their communities, where they have championed for specific initiatives that advocate for girls' engagement and girls' rights. One of those is becoming just a voice for the community. They have created support groups and watchdog committees that are responsible for reporting all the ills that happen against girls and their peers within these communities to relevant authorities.
It's great. So we got to pick Hillary's brain a bit more on the girls' parliament, which we knew was of huge interest to a lot of people, and understand a bit more about how those girls are shaking up decision-making in their homes, in their communities. And Hillary's going to close out his remarks with a reflection on that.
CFK works in partnership with communities to fight extreme poverty through innovative community-based platforms that are focused on long-term youth development and life-saving public health. And so this is all on the basis of the fact that 16 million of Kenyan population right now are young people in the age category of 10 to 24 years, which is our target population. And this forms 35% of the total Kenya population. So it just makes sense for us to begin to grow a generation of people who will look at everything, not just in Kenya, but across the world, a bit differently and positively. And so our work and how it's designed is centered around this category of people. And so we mainly work with schools in informal and very urban settlements, where we have set up examples of engagement such as the girls empowerment. At the community level, we have the community advisory board that has the youth representation, and they talk about all development activities within their communities. We also have the youth peer leadership engagement, and a good example is our youth peer provider initiative that targets peers in terms of education and engagement in the development of their communities. And then lastly, we have the Sports for Development program that uses sports as a tool of mobilizing young people who come together, engage in sporting activities, but get to learn a lot about development and issues affecting them. We have seen a lot of leadership potential and growth among many young people who have been engaged in this program. And today, 9 out of 25 of our colleagues who work in programs have grown through CFK initiatives. They are giving back to their communities right now by providing services. They are playing the role of being role models within their communities and encouraging young people going through similar experiences. They have had the deepest understanding of challenges that young people face, and they're probably better placed to find solutions to those. And so this has been our model for the last 19 years, and we hope to continue with this even as we seek to expand to other counties. I truly believe that girls could be the greatest champions of any form of positive change within our communities. And I'm talking about girls, especially from the speaking age of about 3 to the 24 years. I have read articles all over that fathers of daughters are more likely to give not just money, but their time and engagement in all development activities than those of sons. We have also seen in our practice in Kibera and our engagement with communities that fathers of daughters are more likely to attend school meetings and any form of meeting that discusses the welfare of their daughters than those of sons. As a father of a daughter who is now 7, I have gone through this. My daughter has made me do so many things, including the silly ones. And I just feel like if we use this opportunity to reach out to these daughters who then reach out to their parents, then we are likely to influence how they discuss development agendas, wherever it is that they go to and whichever forums that they get to participate in.
Thanks to Hillary. We're back with John. John, I'm going to ask you my last question, and then hopefully we'll have time to take 1 or 2 from the chat box, which is filled with thoughtful questions for you. John, many joining us today are funders or grant makers themselves. They're donors to EPIC, people who are really passionate about making the right decision on how to support organizations. And I'm wondering if you could close us out on thinking through what are the implications of this conversation that you want people to walk away aware of? You know, what do you want us to have more awareness of? what better decisions can we make in light of this conversation in terms of who we support and what we, are inquisitive about in terms of how they do that?
I would say that one of the greatest needs and opportunities that we have in the philanthropic and nonprofit community is how we support young people. Young people are the future, and the world that they're growing up in today presents a number of challenges that I would argue are more significant than for previous. They're different. I would also argue they're more significant than for previous generations. There's a great deal happening. But the opportunity is tremendous, and only more acute now because of the pandemic, which has thrown a whole additional set of challenges. So I would say really, investing in young people and the organizations that work with young people. But the conversation here today took it to another level, which is making sure that youth are centered in the work, right? And the work is really built out of young people's needs and their solutions, which we talked about earlier, and that they're in leadership roles. So I think that those are really key pieces to this. But I would just make that argument to potential donors and philanthropists that youth is the place to invest. I think it's incredibly important. The pandemic has been an insult to the development of young people. They are supposed to be socializing. They are supposed to be gaining their independence and developing those skills. And that has been interrupted and insulted. And that's going to result in a lot of long-term needs for support and for additional opportunities. And I think the philanthropic community has a tremendous opportunity to step into that space and to help our young people.
John, thanks. Certainly a call to action for all of us. I think we have time maybe for one, maybe two questions. So I'll start you off with, to your point about centering youth. We had a question come in about, in your experience, what does centering youth in sort of leadership decision-making, you talked about those leadership approaches within the academic institutions your programming is embedded in. What's it like to convince other board members, leaders, non-youth adults on accepting that this changing tide?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, well, first, our perspective, our model is that there should be a written annual plan around how mental health will be supported in a school. I would say the same is true of an employer, et cetera, but any boundary community, but we focus on schools. So there has to be an annual planning process, and it should be led by an interdisciplinary team. And that team must include youth, right? So we require it. All right. So the question was, how do we convince? Well, if you're going to work with the JED Foundation, we actually require it. But we don't get a lot of resistance anymore. At the beginning, we got more resistance. We started the program in 2014. I think there is a growing recognition, but the way that I would, and the way that we do argue for it is, you can't promote mental health of young people and students if you're not hearing from them and they're not included, and and you don't learn from them, and they don't help design the ways in which the programs are going to be marketed and utilized, et cetera. Otherwise, they won't land, and I think that that's really the key, to getting these groups to understand. But fortunately and optimistically, I would say that overwhelmingly, they do accept this structure.
It's great to hear. And I think, while your experience is specific, or that your reflections are specific to JED, I think the points you're making about inclusion being a criteria for participation, when you look at the conversations happening in 2020 right now, that's how you demand inclusion. It's just a criteria, for participation. It's a starting point. With that really powerful point that I think can be taken into the corporations people are running, the foundations, the nonprofit work, it has such universal applicability. I'm going to close it out with our thanks, John, to you, to Melissa, to Hillary. We're really proud to be a small part of the work that you do, but we're even prouder of the changes we know that the youth you serve are going to deliver for our global communities. So thank you for your time. And with that, thanks so much, John. I will transition over to Jennifer with our second panel.
Thanks, Kate. So, over the past few months, communities around the globe have been challenged in their ability to deliver education effectively. And even before the pandemic hit, the UN estimated that over 600 million children and youth around the world are already behind in reading and math. So this learning crisis is the greatest global challenge to preparing children and youth for life and work. For today's panel on narrowing the digital divide, we're going to pick the brains of two nonprofit leaders in our portfolio. Joel Rose, CEO and founder of New Classrooms Innovation Partners, and he's joining us live from New York, along with Anne-Marie Canning, CEO of the Brilliant Club in the UK. So the Brilliant Club is an award-winning charity that boosts the chances of kids from underrepresented groups to get into the UK's top universities. Their Scholars Program recruits charismatic PhD tutors to run courses with small groups of 12 to 18-year-olds. So this is not about helping them with their homework. It's really about giving them a taste of university learning. It's to inspire them. It's to really empower these kids to reach for top universities that they may not otherwise dream of reaching for. So let's hear from Anne-Marie on what barriers youth in the UK have been facing on their educational journey.
Jennifer, the one thing we know about pandemics is that they exacerbate inequalities in all their forms, and that's certainly the case in education. In the UK, we already had quite dramatic gaps in attainment for low-income students compared to students who are in more advantaged circumstances. But what we've seen over the course of COVID-19 this year is all of the gains we've made in the past decade in closing those attainment gaps, in creating a more equal education system. We've lost all of that progress, which can be rather devastating. In terms of what we've seen with the young people that we work with, the first thing I want to say is they are incredibly resilient, incredibly resilient. They've blown me away with how they've responded to some of the challenges in their education. I think when we first went into lockdown, everyone was very concerned with digital inclusion. My own organisation published a 6-point guide to digital inclusion. What's really important about digital inclusion is that it's not just about devices. It's about how many kids are sharing that device in a home. It's about internet connectivity. It's about software availability. It's about the support to use those materials, and perhaps most fundamentally, the space in which to learn. So digital inclusion, home learning, is so much more than whether you have a laptop or a tablet available to you. Now, I think what's been really hard hitting here in the UK is the situation we've had with our examinations. In the UK, both our GCSE qualifications and our A-level qualifications, we had a rather protracted experience of allocating those grades. Students have not been able to sit their exams. Lots of students are very frustrated. It's causing large levels of disengagement. How do you stay motivated to study when you don't get to take your exams? In fact, the way the exam grades were allocated, there were a number of changes over a number of weeks, and has led to quite significant changes for young people in terms of their plans for higher education and their plans for education in the post-16 phase. So the exam results have had a massive impact on how young people are feeling about studying and how they're feeling about the next steps in their educational journey.
Brilliant. Hey, Joel. So
Hi,
that was a brilliant, so that was a brilliant look at what's happening on the ground in the UK. Now I want to transport us all back to the but to the US with Joel. So Joel, thanks for joining us live from New York City today.
Great to be with you, Jennifer.
Great to have you. So New Classrooms was sparked by the belief that crowded and understaffed kindergarten to 12 instruction just doesn't meet students' individual needs. New Classrooms has stepped in to meet them where they are with personalized content and instruction tailored for each student each day. So Joel, you founded New Classrooms to innovate on the one-size-fits-all approach to education in America. Can you tell us a little bit more about your model and how tech innovations like machine learning and AI are making it possible?
Sure. Well, I'm a former teacher. And I remember my very first week on the job, I had students in my 5th grade class who came in on a 2nd grade level. I had students who came into my 5th grade class on an 8th grade level, and I had everything in between. And I was given a set of 5th grade math textbooks, and I was told, good luck. And that story is the story of just about every teacher across the country. They know their students are coming in with a wide range of needs, and yet they're given a set of textbooks and a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to instruction. So the way that we do Teach to One is differently. The best way to explain it is to imagine you're in 7th grade and it's time for math class. And instead of walking into room 105, you walk into what's typically a big open space with lots of different stations. In some stations, kids work with teachers. In some stations, kids work with software. And in some stations, kids work with one another. When you walk in for math, you look up and you see a big TV monitor that looks like what you might see at the airport. And you see your name and you see which station you're supposed to go to. So you might spend the first 30 minutes working with the teacher in trinomials, the next 30 minutes working with some software in trinomials. Then the last 10 minutes, you take an online quiz in trinomials, and then you're off to science class. We then take the data from that little quiz and create a new schedule for you for tomorrow based on how you did today.
I love how dynamic your model is. Thank you for sharing. So Joel has just shared a bit about how New Classrooms is fueling their personalized learning model with cool tech. The Brilliant Club story is one of agile adaptation. So let's hear a bit more from Anne-Marie.
The Scholars Programme works with around 16,000 pupils each year, spread all across the country. And so when COVID hit and we saw schools closing, we knew we had to act and take our programmes online. We were determined that children shouldn't miss out on the Scholars Programme. Now, how do you achieve a digital transformation in a scale of a few weeks? Well, I think it's about not looking for perfection. One of the things I encourage my colleagues to think about is having a maker culture, of having something of a punk DIY ethic. We were determined to make sure we had things in place, and we knew they didn't need to be perfect in the first instance, that we could work to continuously improve them. So we've used an array of existing tools and technologies to take the Scholars Programme completely digital. I think we've probably achieved in 3 months what I expected us to achieve over the next 3 years, if I'm honest. And it's been through having a real can-do attitude. Nobody had the levels of expertise to run a digital learning experience like that, but we got them. And we went away and we learned, and we've improved throughout the past few months in terms of our provision. We've also been talking to learners about how they've been experiencing the programme. And crucially, we haven't just focused on technology. We've run training to enable our PhD tutors to understand how to deliver really well in an online environment. It really is a different teaching experience for our PhD tutors. So we've made sure that we've briefed and equipped them in terms of some of the pedagogical changes they need to make for children participating in the programme. And the final thing to say is schools have responded brilliantly as well. One of the greatest joys over the past few weeks has been running our digital graduations. Everyone said a digital graduation would be a fairly sad affair, and it's been totally the opposite. It's been absolutely brilliant. Loads of creativity from schools, lots of wonderful ways to engage young people in an online celebration. You just have to look at our social media feed to see all of the wonderful ways that our students and their school communities have celebrated successfully completing the Scholars Programme. It's been gorgeous. Some, students have, schools have got in like graduation gowns for their students. They've gathered together. We've had a digital roll call. We've had like honorary speeches. We had one school where the kids got to have, celebration cake, and another school where they got to have no secco, which is Prosecco without any alcohol content. So they really have made the best of it. It's been very heartening.
I love that. No secco. What a fun pivot and just an overall amazing achievement during the lockdown. So back to you, Joel. Innovative technology can help tackle inequality, but it comes at a cost. What are some of the next steps that you would recommend in bringing this type of transformation to the masses?
Well, when we think about what's happening today in schools, a number of schools are trying to pivot from offering instruction in school to offering instruction remotely. And that's something that's got to happen today. But that pivot alone isn't enough. If a student is walking into an 8th grade class, whether it's in person or virtual, but they're actually operating on a 4th or 5th grade level, being taught 8th grade material, whether it is live or virtual, isn't going to have the impact that we want it to have. So we need very different ways of thinking about this problem, new learning models. And to bring new learning models to life, there are 3 key ingredients. The first is we need serious research and development to design these new models. We have the beginnings of one that's focused on middle grade math. We'd love to see more in middle grade math and in science and in social studies and in English and for different grade spans. So we need serious R&D to design what these new classroom experiences look like. The second is we need demand incentives. We need to know that if you're a school, most schools aren't used to sort of taking the kinds of risks that are involved in bringing innovation to life. So they need to have the right incentives to say, no, I want to be at the leading edge. I want to really sort of help to bring schools into the 21st century. Sign me up for these sorts of new models. And the third piece are policies. You know, we have got policies upon policies that have been built up over decades that really calcify the same learning model. From regulations that say all students must have a grade level textbook, to instructing all teachers to only teach grade level material. All these things are relics of the same factory and model classroom. But with smart R&D, demand incentives, and the right policies, we can begin to flip the paradigm.
Great, thank you for sharing those insights. And there's a lot of folks in the tech community who are logged in today. So, you know, we need a lot of extra firepower in R&D and just overall support. So for all of you like artificial intelligence and machine learning gurus out there, and then just ed tech proponents, you know, join the movement, join the R&D push, and hopefully we can move things forward. So thank you, everyone. I guess this is the part where we move into the Q&A. And Anne-Marie is actually going to be tuning in live with us from London to answer your questions. So hi, Anne-Marie. Thanks for joining us.
Pleased to be here.
Okay, so thanks to all of you for submitting your questions. We've been collecting them throughout the panel. So let's get started. So the first question I'd like to start with is for both of you. And it's this. Our audience is wondering what role you think governments should play in narrowing the digital divide. So Joel kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. I don't know if you want to take it a step further. And then Anne-Marie, we're curious to hear your thoughts on the government support in the UK.
I mean, I would just say the internet today is utility. It's the equivalent of what electricity was. If communities are not connected to the internet, students can't learn as well. They can't access basic functions in our economy. We need to start thinking about the internet in that way, and not simply as sort of a luxury item that can only be afforded by part of our global population.
Anne-Marie, anything to add about the UK? How has the government been in your work?
Absolutely. I mean, here in the UK, the government has taken some steps to do that. They've been providing laptops to schools for children who don't have the connection or devices they need. And those laptops have taken a long time to get to schools, and they're not the quality I think children need. So I think there's something about quality of provision. But here in the UK, we need a concerted effort. And indeed, we've got the beginnings of that around 5G connectivity and getting that out to all regions of the UK. You know, the internet is a necessity nowadays, not a luxury. I'm here with my great connection, but even I'm worried about it dropping out on this call. So I think quality of provision nationwide here in the UK is a real focus for the government right now.
Absolutely. So here's another one for you, Anne-Marie. You've shared really impressive adaptations you made in the time of COVID lockdowns. Have you considered how or whether your new digital tools and trainings will become part of your longer term model?
Yeah, our digital provision is here to stay. not least because we've launched an entirely new tutoring program to help children catch up with their lost learning during the pandemic, which is predominantly digital and has been so well received. That's where the demand is right now with our schools and colleges. But we'll just keep improving, right? We'll just keep improving, and the digital provision that we've developed is going to be so key for our plans to expand. We'd like to almost double the number of beneficiaries in the next 5 years, and digital is absolutely essential to making that a reality.
Amazing. Okay, so last question. I'm wondering this myself, Joel. Can your model be created for other subjects like literacy? And are we jumping the gun and getting a peek at New Classrooms 2.0?
Well, it can't be true that live teacher-led instruction for every student, every hour of the day by any teacher is the best way to do anything. There have to be really smart, thoughtful ways with really good R&D to make learning anything more engaging, more personalized, and more impactful. That doesn't necessarily mean an assessment every day or the precise way we do math, but the idea that we can put serious R&D, combining the expertise of technologists, academicians, and school operations specialists to design different kinds of experiences for kids to learn, both in and outside of school, that applies certainly across subject areas and grade spans. And we hope to one day do other subjects and grade spans, but we want to solve math first.
Got it, got it. So I want to borrow some words that Anne-Marie shared earlier about resilience. So we at EPIC have been incredibly inspired by how resilient your teams are and how resilient your youth are. And we're just really in awe of everything you've been able to do before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and I'm sure after the pandemic. So really happy to have both of you in the EPIC family. So again, thank you for joining us, Joel and Anne-Marie, and to all of the folks in the audience today. We hoped you enjoyed this program. We're thinking about hosting more webinars like this in the future, so we have a little favor to ask. There's actually a poll for you to answer, so you can tell us what topics you're most interested in for future events. We'd really appreciate it. All you have to do is click on the right-hand side on the poll tab, and there's 5 options. Pick the one that pops out the most. And so with that, we'd love to invite EPIC's founder and CEO, Alexandre Mars, to share closing remarks with all of you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Kate. First, we want to thank you all for attending the EPIC's first virtual conference today. And as social entrepreneurs, we have to innovate and adapt to the world around us. So we are really, really happy that we were able to gather you all and showcase the tremendous work the EPIC portfolio organizations are accomplishing day in and day out. We know that the current crisis is disproportionately affecting those most vulnerable in society, which makes the work of our portfolio organizations all the more essential. I want to thank Kimbal for honoring us with his presence and sharing his insightful thoughts, and for being such an amazing support of EPIC. Thank you also to Chanel and 17 Capital for their generous support, and to EMC3 helping us with the production. I want to take the time to recognize our exceptional panelists, Joel Rose from New Classrooms, John MacPhee from JED, Anne-Marie Kemming from the Riordan Club, Hilary Omala from Carolina For Kibera, and Melissa Jones from Pivotal. Thank you for sharing with us your insight and expertise on those 2 pivotal areas that we care so deeply about at EPIC. We are grateful for your time and inspired by the hard work you put to advance social justice. And I can't stress enough how crucial these organizations are, led by brilliant and dedicated social entrepreneurs who have made it their life's mission to help young people get a fair shot at a decent life. I also think it's worth highlighting the amazing work being done by our EPIC alumni organizations. I recall the story of an amazing social entrepreneur named Twizigi Jackson Kaguri, who has dedicated his life to helping orphans and kids affected by AIDS in Uganda. After losing his brother and sister to ads in the early 2000s, Twizingi decided to use the $5,000 meant for his house in the US and to instead build a 2-room school for the Nyaka community where he was born. Over the last 20 years, his project has managed to reach an astonishing 60,000 kids in the country. It's nothing short of amazing. Stories like Nyaka are why we could not be prouder to be able to support organizations like this in the past, right now, and in the future. And of course, we cannot do it alone. We count on you and your support to help this organization to do what they do best, giving young people the help they need and deserve. So I humbly request, please share with others what you learned here today. Talk about EPIC with your friends and families and help grow our movements. If you know any organizations we could benefit from our support, send them our way. Or if you, as an entrepreneur, want to get involved, sign our EPIC pledge. Anything that you can do to help us in our mission, we will sincerely appreciate. And before we wrap this up, I want to thank deeply my amazing EPIC team for the tireless work they have done to make this real and to make this very first virtual EPIC Live a success. Thank you, everyone, and have a beautiful rest of your day.